In the spring of 1967, the American war in Vietnam faces a structural problem. The North Vietnamese army is massing forces along the DMZ in numbers that threaten to overwhelm the 3rd Marine Division, and General William Westmoreland needs his Marines to push north to meet them. But pulling the Marines out of the southern provinces of I Corps means abandoning those provinces to the enemy. The solution requires more troops. Westmoreland does not have them. To understand why, it helps to consider the broader arithmetic of the war at this point. By 1967, there are nearly 500,000 American troops in South Vietnam, and Westmoreland is already requesting more. The commitment is enormous, but the country is vast, the enemy is dispersed, and the strategy of attrition demands that American forces maintain pressure everywhere simultaneously. In I Corps, the 5 northernmost provinces, this means holding both the DMZ frontier and the insurgent-riddled southern coast at the same time, with forces that were never sized for both missions. Westmoreland's answer is improvisation. He orders the creation of a provisional task force, assembled from brigades borrowed from other commands elsewhere in the country, to take over the southern half of I Corps so the Marines can concentrate in the north. It is, in effect, an ad hoc division. 3 brigades that have never trained together, never fought together, and share no common operating procedures, thrown into a combat zone and told to function as one. The man chosen to command it is Major General William Rawson, Westmoreland's own Chief of Staff. Rawson is not a headquarters general. He earned a Distinguished Service Cross at Anzio at the age of 25 and served alongside the French at Dien Bien Phu in 1954. By 1967, he has been in Vietnam longer than nearly any other senior commander and knows the terrain and politics of I Corps as well as anyone in MACV. He names the formation after his home state. Task Force Oregon is activated on April 20, 1967, at Chu Ly Marine Corps Air Base. The composition of the task force reflects the ad hoc nature of its creation. 3 brigades, pulled from 3 different parent divisions, the 196th Light Infantry Brigade, the 3rd Brigade of the 25th Infantry Division, and the 1st Brigade of the 101st Airborne Division. This last unit, the paratroopers of the 101st, have been in Vietnam since 1965, moving from one crisis to the next across the country without ever settling into a permanent area of operations. They are the most combat-experienced soldiers in the task force, and, in some respects, the most worn down. The 3rd Brigade of the 25th deploys to Duc Pho, a district capital in Quang Nay Province 2 miles from the coast. The 196th moves to Chu Ly, 40 miles up the coast. And the 1st Brigade of the 101st Airborne arrives at Duc Pho in May under Brigadier General Salve Matheson, coming ashore at Razorback Beach in an amphibious-style landing and establishing a forward base they name Carentan. To appreciate what Task Force Oregon is walking into, it is necessary to understand the ground. Quang Nai and Quang Tin provinces have been under near-total communist control since the First Indochina War against the French. Except for the base at Chu Ly, the enemy controls most of the coastline, running supplies and weapons by boat from the north. Inland, the Quai Son Valley stretches 25 miles from the mountains to the coastal lowlands, rice paddies, scattered villages, thick hedgerows, connected to Highway 1 by 2 narrow roads that converge at the district center of Heap Duc. The 2nd NVA Division, under Senior Colonel Lê Hữu Tru, operates in the Quai Son Valley with approximately 6,000 men across 3 regiments, the 3rd, 21st, and 31st, along with anti-aircraft assets, 120mm mortars and 120mm rockets. These are not guerrillas, they are regulars who have been fighting in this valley since 1966 and know it intimately. Further south, around Duc Pho, American intelligence identifies 3 numbered base areas: 122, 123, and 124, running through the mountainous jungle west of the Va and Ta Cao River valleys. The 2nd Viet Cong Regiment operates here alongside local force units and guerrilla companies. An estimated 75% of the surrounding population supports the insurgency. The mountains are riddled with booby traps, and the VC have been entrenched in the area for years. This is the environment in which a cobbled-together task force, with no shared history and no divisional identity, is expected to conduct sustained offensive operations. The first major operation begins on May 11, 1967. Rossum names all his operations after Oregon counties, and Malheur is the first. The 1st Battalion, 327th Infantry, and the 2nd Battalion, 502nd Infantry conduct helicopter assaults into the mountains west of Duck Foe, targeting Base Area 124. The operational concept is straightforward in theory. Insert troops by helicopter into the jungle, locate enemy base areas, destroy caches, and engage enemy forces. In practice, this means Hueys flying over triple canopy jungle to landing zones of uncertain security, paratroopers jumping into elephant grass taller than a man, and infantry pushing into terrain the enemy has occupied for years, with no road access, no armor support, and resupply entirely dependent on helicopters. The initial days produce scattered contacts. Small arms fire from tree lines, sniper rounds, booby traps, wounding men who never see the enemy. The Viet Cong are not seeking set-piece engagements. They engage, inflict casualties, and withdraw into the jungle, a pattern that will define much of the fighting throughout Task Force Oregon's existence. On May 15th, one engagement escalates significantly. A company from the 1st Brigade walks into a battalion-sized force dug into a bunker complex along a ridgeline. The soldiers are pinned in a dry riverbed while enemy fire pours down from fortified positions on a 1,500-foot overlook. Aviation crews call the place Chump Valley, a name that speaks for itself. Major Charles Kettles, a flight commander with the 176th Aviation Company, volunteers to lead a flight of Hueys into the LZ to extract the trapped soldiers. He flies in under heavy fire, delivers reinforcements, and returns a second time. That afternoon, when the order comes to pull out the remaining 40 infantrymen and 4 crewmen from a downed helicopter, Kettles leads the flight in a third time. On the way out, a radio call reports that 8 men have been left behind, cut off by fire too heavy to reach them. Every gunship is out of ammunition. Air support has departed. Kettles turns his damaged helicopter around and flies back in alone. The 8 soldiers reach the aircraft. Kettles brings the shot-up Huey home on instruments that are barely functioning. 44 men are saved. None of their names end up on the Vietnam Veterans Memorial. Kettles receives a Distinguished Service Cross, later upgraded to the Medal of Honor by Congress in 2016. He credited the 74 crew members who flew with him that day. It is a characteristic episode of Task Force Oregon's war. Not a sweeping victory, but a moment of individual courage that keeps men alive when the tactical situation has deteriorated beyond what the plan anticipated. Malheur 1 runs from May 11th through June 8th. The paratroopers engage the enemy on 18 separate occasions, killing 369 by the official count. But the Viet Cong are adapting, avoiding the kind of engagements that favor American firepower. Malheur 2 follows immediately, June 8th through August 2nd, as Matheson pushes his battalions into base areas 122 and 123. With the enemy avoiding contact, the operation shifts toward denying the Viet Cong their support base. Over 2 weeks, trucks and helicopters relocate more than 7,000 civilians and 1,200 head of cattle from the VAI and TRA cow valleys to refugee centers at Duck Foe and Nia Han. Several hundred tons of rice and salt are either destroyed or airlifted out. The valleys are stripped bare by combat, herbicides, and forced evacuation. It is worth noting the scale of that displacement. 7,000 people uprooted in a deliberate effort to separate the insurgency from its support base, a tactic consistent with the broader American approach to counterinsurgency in Vietnam, but one that rarely produces lasting results. By the end of the year, the Viet Cong are moving through the same ground again. When both Malheur operations conclude, the 1st Brigade reports 869 enemy killed and 314 weapons captured, against 81 American dead. The figures appear favorable on paper. Whether they reflect a durable change in the balance of the area is another question. The operational tempo that follows is relentless. Hood River launches on August 2nd, the same day Malheur 2 closes. Intelligence from Arvin 2nd Corps indicates that the NVA 1st Regiment is regrouping in Base Area 121, 20 kilometers west of Quang Ngai City. with the 21st Regiment potentially joining them. The assessed objective is an attack on Quang Ngai itself before the South Vietnamese presidential election on September 3rd, a propaganda opportunity the Americans are determined to deny. The new Task Force Oregon commander, Major General Richard T. Knowles, Rosson having been promoted to Lieutenant General and reassigned to 1st Field Force in July, plans a multinational encirclement. The 101st Airborne Battalion's air assault west of the base area. The South Korean 2nd Marine Brigade pushes from the north. 2 ARVN Ranger battalions approach from the south, backed by an ARVN Airborne Battalion and SIDGI companies screening the flanks. The operation runs from August 2nd to 13 and produces mostly small contacts, engagements with groups of around 15 men, armed principally with semi-automatic carbines. No heavy weapons, no significant caches. The intelligence conclusion is telling. The forces in Base Area 121 are guerrillas and local units, not the main force NVA regiments that had been expected. The larger formations have either dispersed or never arrived. 166 enemy killed against 21 American dead. The attack on Quang Ngai never materializes, which qualifies as a success in the context of American objectives, but the enemy has, once again, avoided decisive engagement. Hood River closes on August 13th. Operation Benton launches the same day. It is a 21-day search and destroy operation in Quang Tin Province, targeting the 21st Regiment of the 2nd NVA Division in Base Area 117, in the mountains west of Tam Kee. The terrain here is different from the coastal lowlands around Duc Pho. This is mountain warfare. Dense jungle canopy, steep ridgelines, trails that become streams during the monsoon. The NVA have been fortifying Base Area 117 for years. A notable tactical pattern emerges. The enemy engages in the late afternoon, when fading light degrades the effectiveness of American air and artillery support. They fight until dark, then withdraw. It is a deliberate approach designed to neutralize the principal American advantage, fire support, and it proves effective. Despite up to 5 battalions sweeping through the area, the Americans cannot force a decisive engagement with the 21st Regiment. What they do uncover is revealing: 132 weapons, 2 large ammunition caches loaded with mortar and recoilless rifle rounds, a major training facility with barracks and a hospital. Some villages in the area are using NVA currency as their primary medium of exchange, a detail that illustrates the depth of enemy control over the local population. The NVA shoot down 5 Hueys during Benton. Every helicopter approach to a landing zone in those mountains is a calculated risk. By the time the operation concludes on August 29th, the claimed toll is 503 enemy killed against 45 Americans dead. This is the pace of Task Force Oregon's war from May through August 1967. Malheur 1 and 2, Hood River, Benton, 4 continuous months of operations in some of the most difficult terrain in Vietnam, against an enemy that cannot be pinned down for destruction. The same rifle companies, the same paratroopers, rotating through operation after operation, taking casualties, absorbing replacements who must learn the ground, while the experienced soldiers grow fewer. Throughout this period, Task Force Oregon confronts a problem that firepower alone cannot resolve. In Quang Ngai Province, the Viet Cong have been embedded in the civilian population since the 1950s. Villagers provide food, recruits, and intelligence. The infrastructure of the insurgency is not in the jungle. It is in the hamlets, the rice paddies, the fishing villages along the coast. An American patrol can walk through a seemingly peaceful village and never know that weapons have been buried beneath the floor the previous night. The mine and booby trap problem is particularly acute. In the southern I Corps area, booby traps cause a disproportionate share of American casualties. Toe poppers, bouncing mines, command-detonated devices built from unexploded American ordnance. Some companies lose more men to booby traps than to direct enemy fire. It is a form of attrition that is difficult to counter and deeply corrosive to morale. On September 11, 1967, the focus shifts north. Brigadier General Samuel Costa, who has assumed command of Task Force Oregon from Knowles, launches Operation Wheeler, targeting the 2nd NVA Division in the Quai Son Valley northwest of Chu Ly. Wheeler marks a change in the character of the fighting. This is not chasing guerrillas through base areas. The 2nd NVA Division is present in strength and willing to fight. The Kwai Son Valley has been contested ground since 1966, when the Marines bled heavily in Operations Union and Union 2 against the same enemy division. Now the Army is taking over responsibility for the valley. Initially, the Army brigades hold an advantage. The NVA in the Kwai Son Valley are accustomed to fighting Marines, who have relatively few helicopter assets and are used to moving in daylight without aerial observation. The Army's Huey gunships change that equation rapidly. Crews from the aviation companies supporting Task Force Oregon find targets across the valley. Enemy soldiers caught in the open, moving along trails, crossing rice paddies. The adjustment, however, comes quickly. The NVA deploy heavy 12.7mm and 14.5mm machine guns in the anti-aircraft role. Every helicopter approach becomes a gauntlet of tracer fire. Flight crews learn to vary their routes, altitudes, and timing, but losses mount. The cost of air mobility in a contested environment is paid primarily in helicopter crews, a reality that is sometimes obscured by the emphasis on infantry casualties in historical accounts. On September 25, 1967, Westmoreland makes the provisional arrangement permanent. Task Force Oregon is redesignated the 23rd Infantry Division, the Americal Division. It is the first division activated in a combat zone since the original Americal Division was formed on New Caledonia in 1942 during the Second World War, and the 7th Army Division now fighting in Vietnam. Costa receives his 2nd star. This is a detail that tends to be overlooked. Task Force Oregon was conceived as a temporary measure. Borrow some brigades, cover the southern provinces while the Marines handle the DMZ. Then dissolve the formation when proper divisions become available. Instead, it becomes a permanent fixture in the order of battle, because the strategic situation in I Corps never improves enough to make it unnecessary. The stopgap becomes the institution. On October 4th, the 3rd Brigade of the 1st Cavalry Division arrives in the Kwai Son Valley under Colonel Hubert Campbell and launches Operation Wallowa. The 1st Cav troopers bring a different operational method, inserting small reconnaissance teams by helicopter to locate the enemy, then piling on with ready reaction forces once contact is established. With favorable weather that rarely curtails flying, the Cav's gunships operate almost continuously. The NVA, still adjusting to the density of Army aviation in the valley, sustain heavy losses. On November 11th, Operations Wheeler and Wallowa are consolidated into Wheeler-Wallowa, a single continuous operation across the division's area. The 196th Light Infantry Brigade, which has replaced the 101st Airborne's 1st Brigade after the paratroopers depart for 2nd Corps to rejoin their parent division, takes over the Wheeler sector. The 1st Cav's 3rd Brigade continues Wallowa. The fighting grinds on through the monsoon and into the new year. Meanwhile, new brigades are arriving to fill out the Americal Division's permanent structure, and they are green. The 198th Light Infantry Brigade reaches Vietnam from Fort Hood on October 22nd and deploys to Duc Pho, where veterans of the 3rd Brigade, 4th Infantry Division provide a crash course in survival. The 11th Infantry Brigade arrives on December 20th for the same treatment. The challenge of this transition is significant. Battle-hardened soldiers who have been fighting for months attempt to transfer hard-won tactical knowledge to replacements who have never experienced combat. How to spot a booby trap, how to read a tree line, how to call in fire support. Then they hand over the sector and leave. Institutional knowledge can only be partially transferred. The rest must be relearned at cost. This problem is not unique to Task Force Oregon. The American personnel replacement system in Vietnam, individual rotation rather than unit rotation, means that combat experience is continuously bleeding out of formations across the country. But the effect is amplified in a provisional formation where entire brigades rotate in and out, taking their collective knowledge with them. By January 1968, the Americal Division is fully constituted. The 196th, 198th, and 11th Infantry Brigades, along with the 1st Squadron, 1st Cavalry Regiment, and its M113 Armored Cavalry Assault Vehicles. The 3rd Brigade of the 1st Cav continues to operate in the Kwai Son Valley under Americal's operational control. The division is now responsible for a vast area covering 2 provinces, hundreds of villages, and thousands of square miles of jungle and agricultural land, against an enemy that has not been defeated and has no intention of withdrawing. And then comes Tet, January 31st, 1968, the offensive that reshapes the entire American war in Vietnam. The Americal Division will write its own chapters in that crisis, some distinguished, some deeply damaging to the division's reputation. But that is a subsequent story. What can be assessed at this point is what Task Force Oregon accomplished and what it cost. In 5 months of continuous operations, Rosson, Knowles, and Costa built a functioning division from borrowed components. They conducted 6 named operations: Malheur 1 and 2, Hood River, Benton, Cook, and Wheeler. They claimed over 2,000 enemy killed. They disrupted base areas, destroyed supply caches, and prevented at least one planned attack on a provincial capital. Most critically, they freed the Marine divisions to concentrate in the northern provinces, which was the original strategic purpose of the formation. They achieved this with a force that had no divisional history, no shared identity, and no assurance that its component brigades would remain long enough to finish what they started. Every rotation brought new soldiers who had to relearn the same lessons their predecessors had already paid for. The cost was measured in the currency of the war. 81 men killed in Operations Malheur 1 and 2 alone, 45 more in Benton, 21 in Hood River, and those are only the killed. The wounded were many times that number. Task Force Oregon rarely receives its own chapter in histories of the Vietnam War. It is generally treated as a transitional formation, a footnote that existed briefly before becoming the Americal Division. But the men who served under that provisional designation from April to September 1967 fought sustained combat in terrain that heavily favored the enemy, under an organizational arrangement that was never intended to be permanent. They were, in a sense, the arithmetic of a war that was outrunning the resources committed to fight it, a gap between strategy and means, filled by improvisation and the soldiers who carried it out. General Rosson went on to 4 stars and 4 tours in Vietnam, longer than any other senior commander. He did not talk much about Task Force Oregon after the war. The formation's brief existence speaks for itself.